Well, our speaker who's come from the Rogue Valley tonight is Jeff LaLande. Jeff was the archaeologist for the Rogue River, and then in later days, Rogue River Siskiyou National Forests. For 30 years, he worked in archaeology in the Rogue River Basin, and he's been a resident of the Rogue River Basin for half a century, I guess it is. Is that what you said, Jeff? 50 years. Wow. So he's been retired some years, but Jeff's been very active in retirement, doing consulting work. You did some consulting work. I think you came and helped us celebrate the 150th anniversary of the Fort Klamath Museum site, if I remember right. And writes lots of articles for the Southern Oregon Historical Society newsletter. Has a PhD in history from the University of Oregon. I asked him where he was reared, and he said he was a Navy brat, and so the world is kind of like his home. What I appreciate about Jeff is that he addresses such a wide range of topics, and not just from an archaeological point of view, but just brings things into a context that all of us can understand and in a more meaningful way. And so I'm looking forward to how he treats the subject of mining in the Oregon High Desert this evening. So Jeff, if you would, come on up, and I'll hand the microphone off to you. You want me to pin it on you? Sure. Go over here with it. Okay. And I'm going to sit in the back of the room for just a moment, Katie, and then I'll come.
Okay. Well, hello, everybody. Do you leave all the lights on, or is that just the way it is? It's fine with me, but okay. Everybody okay? Okay. All righty. So yeah, I came over from the Rogue Valley, over the mountain, and I'm just happy to be here. And already I have done a bad thing. There we go. Okay, so title of my talk, and the word mining, I think most of us, we usually think of what? Precious metals, gold, exactly. And yes, gold was mined in this area, of course, over in the Rogue River Valley, but it was really not mined heavily except on the far northern fringes of the Oregon High Desert. And I'll define what I mean by the Oregon High Desert. You probably each have a little bit different definitions, but I'll do that in a second. Not really within the high desert, but subsequently to that very real gold rush in the Blue Mountains in the John Day country, starting in the 1860s. Subsequently to that, there were many other kinds of mining in the high desert country, and that's occurred and still occurring. We'll examine this largely much more humble kind of mining. And it's much more recent as well. All of the mining history from the region's original native people, the Northern Paiute by and large, and their mining of toolstone for making chipstone tools, obsidian largely, to the generally low value per volume minerals of the many little known substances during recent years and continuing today. Okay, so here's what I basically define as a hard desert is largely Lake Harney and the southernmost portion, not the southernmost, but just accepting the northernmost part of Malheur County. A little bit southeast Deschutes, little southern sliver of southeast Crook County. And the high desert, sometimes called the Sagebrush Sea, and underneath that Sagebrush Sea is virtually all volcanic, and lava flows, so on and so forth. Huge basalt flows and other kinds of volcanic deposits. And lava flows tend not to be real conducive to the emplacement of gold. And that's one of the reasons there's not been a lot of gold mining in the high desert. So in the beginning, in ancient times, what we must admit was a very simple, but a very real form of mining. Quarrying, but quarrying is considered mining, and it was all about toolstone. Obsidian's a volcanic glass, as you all know, and it was used for many purposes, especially making arrow points, scrapers, knives, and other very important tools to make a living out there in the high desert. But the native people also went to the desert's outcrops where they were available, things like jasper and agate. Not so common as obsidian, but they were gathered and also turned into chipstone tools. And another kind of rock, much more prevalent out there, that was used for larger tools, choppers, and big kind of mega tools, were fine-grained varieties of basalt. And I always get excited when I'm out there doing a survey, finding, I love the bigger tools. I like those. And those were made into these crude things like big choppers. So we've had at least 14,000 years. Many of you know we've got 14,000 years of human history at the very least in the Oregon High Desert from the archaeology done at Paisley Cave number 5. And during that time, mining of obsidian and jasper for making those tools. Such as thousands of years ago, the Clovis fluted point out of obsidian that you see on the left, on to very recent times, that little desert side notch style point might be only about 200 years old. Both made out of obsidian, but coming from very, very different times. And the fluted point there, the Clovis point, likely used to hunt mammals out there that have long since been extinct. And there were Columbian woolly mammoth, giant bison, Shasta ground sloth, and other creatures that were prevalent, now long gone because of climate change. Then, a little over 150 years ago, I'm going to be using, you saw it on my title slide, A to Z. I'm using kind of an alphabetical theme here as we go along. Hope that'll maybe make things a little more interesting. So using that theme of the alphabet, G is for gold. The Oregon Trail immigrants on the so-called lost wagon train across the high desert in 1845, supposedly, they told the tale anyway, found gold nuggets along the way, somewhere between northern Malheur County and southeastern Cook County. Found gold nuggets, put them in a blue bucket, and neither the nuggets nor the blue bucket ever made it to Oregon City. They were lost, but that became a fable in early Oregon history. So it would not be Oregon, but California, where effective gold mining really began in the far west and would bring a gold rush to the American West. 1848, 1849, discovered February of 1848. Those 49ers, it took a little while for word to get out, people to gear up and make their way west. We see San Francisco here in the very early 1850s, after its huge transformation in 1848-49 by the arrival of the Argonauts, the gold seekers, the 49ers. And that gold strikes in California moved ever northward, Sierras, across into the Klamath Mountains and so forth, until it went on north into the Oregon Territory, into the Rogue River country, into the Siskiyou Mountains in 1851-52, that winter. First effective discovery of gold in Oregon. And California's population explosion and ethnic diversity, very diverse ethnic groups in the gold rush period in California, that all came up into southwesternmost Oregon in the Rogue River country. With their new gold strikes came Chinese miners. And to the north, on the far fringes of the Oregon High Desert, came gold discoveries there in 1863, the John Day gold strike. They're in the southwestern Blue Mountains, which are basically the northeastern quarter of Oregon, Blue Mountains, whereas Oregon High Desert's basically the southeastern quarter of Oregon. And the gold strikes spread to other areas in the Blue Mountains, and there was gold found in southern Idaho, just to the east of Oregon. And the John Day Gold Rush led to the so-called Snake Wars against the Northern Paiute. Miners and others from the Rogue Valley crossed the high desert to the John Day mines, as well as to those new strikes in Idaho's Boise Basin and the Salmon River country. And the resulting conflict with the Northern Paiute people of the high desert ended with their defeat and their confinement to reservations. Now let's take a quick look at the kind of early gold mining technology that came to northeastern Oregon, not in the high desert itself, but in the Blue Mountains in the 1860s and later. Mining was a back-breaking work, manual labor. But there were two basic kinds of gold deposits, as many of you know, which ended up involving two different kinds of gold mining. They're placer deposits and which are gold particles, nuggets, so forth, deposited by streams, creeks, and so forth, or sometimes by gravity coming down the hill. They're not from the original place in the bedrock where the gold came from. So placer mining is kind of a secondary depositing of the gold. And lode mining is the hard rock kind of mining back into the mountain to get to the original emplacement of the gold, which is tends to be harder, more expensive. That original, and we're going to be dealing with placer mining here for these next few minutes. Placer mining went through an evolution in technology. Now, the gold pan was not really for mining itself. It was simply to kind of assess the possible value in an area of gravel bar, and so forth. So it was just meant to see, is this area worthy of more exploration and more digging? Because digging was hard work. And those guys are working with called a cradle. Back and forth, it looks like a baby's cradle. Went back and forth, agitate, had little strips in the bottom, and it was not very effective. And soon came the rocker box, which you couldn't do a lot of mining of material with it at one time, but it was certainly an improvement. And with the rocker box, there's the area up here has a metal plate that you can't see because of all the gravel that's been put in there with lots of holes in it, poked in it for the water and the smaller material to go through. Above it, and that plate's called a grizzly. And that would keep the bigger stuff that you didn't want to mess with. When you got enough from the grizzly, you dumped it back in the creek and brought more. So hopefully the gold is falling through the holes along with pieces of sand and so forth. And then more and more water being poured. It goes down, the water going back into the creek, but there's little slaps called riffles that capture the gold because it's the heaviest. And the rocker box evolved into the long tom, and and some of them were linked together for a good little distance. And then the long tom quickly evolved into the full grade sluice system. And those riffles, you can see the water is going plunk, plunk, plunk. See all that? The riffles would be coated with mercury, with quicksilver, because quicksilver and gold, they like each other. They amalgamate. And so the quicksilver kind of capture the gold as it's going by with the water flow. And later you'd recover the amalgam and deal with it to separate the mercury and the gold. Reuse the mercury. Well, then came, after the easy deposits had been mined, came a kind of an industrial scale form of hydraulic, called hydraulic mining, simply a large scale way of placer mining. And it was a big investment, required a big investment, and often involved partnerships, companies, big crews, digging ditches, sometimes miles long, to bring the water to the area to be mined. And these tended to be the higher, older alluvial deposits. Alluvial meaning deposited by river or stream action over thousands of years. And this shows early, whoops, sorry. And I really messed up that slide. I meant to fix that this morning and I didn't get around to it. Hope you can read some of those things. So hydraulic mining invented in California by a guy from New England. It began with small diameter flexible hose. Soon you got into steel, iron sheet pipes called penstocks, taking the water in that pipeline down to the area to be mined. Steeper slope, high up, maybe 200 feet high above the mine, you get a real powerful jet of water coming out the other end, at the bottom. And it came to Oregon, and it came to the John Day country. And kind of a simplified measure, this is a cross section, looking sideways, if you will. This is looking down, a plan view. Here's a ditch coming off of a creek, bringing it around all the contours, the water, and then the water is diverted into a head box. There's a head box, there's a cross section of the ditch, and it goes straight down the slope in that penstock, the pipeline made out of iron sheet, and goes down to the area to be mined, which is called a washing pit. And the water would come out these giant nozzles, huge fire hose nozzle, and be aimed at the area to be mined with a blast powerful enough to kill a guy sometimes. And that's what you move the boulders all around with the nozzles, and pretty soon you had an ever-growing excavation, a big hole in the ground with the material also with a giant pushing material that's coming out of the area being excavated by the water down through a big sluice system. And that included lots of rocks, waste rock. You didn't want them. Those went out the end of what was called the tailing sluice and became big piles. There is, instead of a ditch, that's a flume, bringing water, dumping it down into that head box below, and then there goes the pipe down to the area to be mined. And these are two different washing pits. The one on the right is up in the John Day area, in the Blue Mountain. One on the left is over in the Applegate country, where I'm from. And you're looking at, this is all done at whole excavation was done by the force of those sprays of water. And that's the Sterling mine in the Applegate country. That's over in the John Day country there. You see lots of tailings, lots of waste rock. Tailing sluice, that's all rocks. That mine's up yonder. This is coming out with capturing gold, various side sluices, and this is taking the tailings out. And so this sluice was extended as the rocks built up and up. They keep building it out. And that is a washing pit, how it looks today. That's a hydraulic mine over in the Applegate, about 140 years old. And those little pine trees down there have very tight annular rings because it's tough ground. So Chinese worked in the mines, digging ditches, and sometimes worked in companies of their own, doing hydraulic mining. And many of you know that in the town of John Day, the Kam Wah Chung store, wonderful place, state park, left over from these two Chinese men. It was kind of like a drugstore, herbal remedies and so forth. It's just a fascinating place. It's been like a time capsule left there. It's well worth seeing. Now, in the high desert, there were a few very minor gold strikes. For example, in 1906, there was one in the Coyote Hills, northwest of Plush. Who hasn't been to Plush? Got to go to Plush. It didn't last long, didn't amount to very much, definitely way out in the high desert. And another one at New Pine Creek, south of Lakeview, right near the state border there with California. Again, in about 1900. And basically these were nothing to write home about, were over very quick, not big gold strikes. So Oregon's high desert has had no real gold mining worth talking about, like its high desert neighbor to the south, Nevada. There, since the 1960s or so, there has been huge scale of gold mining, and you can see it when you're driving Interstate 80 between Carlin and Battle Mountain, off to the south. It's huge excavators, giant dump trucks. It's just an amazing operation that extends for thousands of acres. And what it is, the gold is an almost microscopic size gold, that there's just enough of it there, and it's easy enough to get to, not too far below the surface of the earth, to use this excavation to process giant volumes of gold and make it pay. And that's been going on for a long time. And that gold was hydrothermically deposited within the soil and the rock. And Klamath Falls has geothermic activity, and this was something kind of similar, but on a massive scale to that. But returning to Oregon, in the Blue Mountains, another kind of placer mining in the 1900s was dredge mining. This is the Sumter Dredge, which is also a state park we're seeing. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, in earlier gold mining areas like the Blue Mountains or over where I live, gold mining was a form of subsistence, survival for some people. Just kind of a way to make beans, as they put it, and get by during those hard times. The old ways persisted during those years. But after Pearl Harbor, the federal government's War Production Board shut down all the gold mines in the country because gold was not a strategic metal, something that needed to be produced for making these high strength steel alloys and other things used in the war. So that ended gold mining for that period. But up in the Blue Mountains, Strawberry Mountains area, chrome was being mined for that very purpose because it was a strategic mineral. So although there is some gold in them there hills in northeastern Oregon, most of what's being mined today is done by hobbyists with 4-inch dredges. You know, I'm going to turn this a little bit. Don't have to keep turning around. So right after World War II came a new kind of rush. And before we get into the non-precious minerals, which are largely, what I'll be talking about are largely white or gray colored substances, one strategic mineral was mined in some quantities from the high desert during the 1950s and 1960s. I'm sure a lot of you know. And it began with a U. What would that be? Uranium. You're right. It was the Cold War. So rather than the lure of yellow metal, people were following the lure of yellow cake, which is the process of uranium ore. It was called yellow cake, and it can be highly radioactive. You know, I jumped over something here. I needed to talk about cinnabar. I talked about it a little bit ago, but cinnabar was mined in the high desert for the very same purpose that we've talked about before, amalgamating with gold, but it's highly toxic. And this is the opalite mine down in southern Malheur County. Large, recent mine, toxic tailings there, and which are being cleaned up now by the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. So you did have cinnabar mining. Then on to uranium. Uranium was mined in southern Lake County and in southern Malheur County. And lots of other places in the West had uranium mining during the Cold War. And it left another toxic legacy, just like cinnabar had. One on the right, that is in Lake County, near Lakeview. And the one above is in Arizona. Some of those men are from the Navajo Reservation and mining uranium. A number of them died of cancer because of the radioactivity that they experienced. And they're near Lakeview. This shows on the right side the the White King mine, a big open pit mine for uranium. Another one nearby was the Lucky Lass. And these were left open for a number of years. And there was the production, the ore milling plant just north of Lakeview, which later became a pine mill. And there's a jar of yellow cake. Well, the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, then funded the Superfund remediation of these two mines near Lakeview in recent years. And you can see the capping of the tailings has happened down below there. These were not super dangerous, but they were just enough that it did require this kind of work. So what about those other minerals I talked about from A to Z that I promised? After the high desert's short-lived precious metals, high value per ounce mineral rushes, such as uranium, very valuable per ounce. What else? Well, basically there's a whole bunch of different kinds of white stuff. And it wasn't cocaine. We'll be talking about what it was. It was compared to gold or uranium. These are very humble substances, humble in their appearance and in their uses, not particularly valuable in small quantities, but in large enough volume, you can make a go of it commercially. And people have been and are still doing so. And it's a continuing part of the high desert's mining history. So that's where we're going now. S is for salt. You've all heard of the salt blocks that cattlemen put out on the range for their herds. Those cattle need salt. Well, in the 1870s and 1880s, ranchers in the Warner Valley, which is east of Lakeview, east of the Warner Mountains, and between the Warner Mountains and Hart Mountain, with all those lakes that extend northward, becoming ever more shallower as you go along the base, western base of Hart Mountain. They become shallower and shallower, more alkaline, salty, until finally they're just dry lake beds, rarely have water, but they have lots of salt encrusted on the rims or on the lake bed itself. And ranchers in the early days then gathered up that salt for spreading to their herds and also sold it commercially. But now, to those much more recently mined whitish gray minerals and to more letters of the alphabet. Let's try the letter B. B is for borates or borax. These are all salts of boron, which is an element that is in fact the B on the periodic chart, number 5 on the periodic chart. It's not really all that plentiful in volumes, but it's found almost everywhere. In recognizable physical form, boron's usually found as water-soluble minerals called borates, especially evaporites such as borax. And these are found in arid environments, and borax or sodium borate is used for swimming pool water filters, the making of fiberglass, ceramics. The ancient Chinese used it in some of their finest glazes for their ceramics during the Tang Dynasty, and in metallurgical processes. So it has a lot of different uses, even a few pharmaceuticals. And now it's even used in some gold mining because it can do the same kind of thing that Mercury does without being toxic. It wants to amalgamate with gold. But for most of us, I think borax means soap products, detergents, and bleaches. And where was borax mining in the West most well known? Death Valley, by golly, you are right. Began in the late 1800s with the Pacific Coast Borax Company, whose paired teams of 20 mules hauled 2 heavy wagons to the railroads, 2 big heavy wagons full of borax and a water tank at the back for the mules and the mule skinner. The mule teams became the logo of that company's successor, the U.S. Borax Company, which is still around, which, as most of us here know, sponsored a show in the 1950s and 60s, one hosted by a former Hollywood star whose career, at least as a film actor, had already peaked. Well, he went on to other things. So if you're my age or older, you remember that show with Ronald Reagan as the host. So this is Borax Lake in Oregon on the east side of the Steens Mountain. And it was mined from the late 1890s until about 1902 over in Harney County's Alvord Desert. And those very same 20 mule teams went southward, hauling the borax the many hard miles to the railroad at Winnemucca. And the old diggings there, those were excavated by Chinese crews. And some rusted equipment, as you can see, still remains. And there's a hot pond, a geothermal pool there called Borax Lake, which has that little minnow. The species is only found there. So both the historic resources and the little chub there, the little minnow, are protected by both the Nature Conservancy and the Bureau of Land Management. It's a very interesting place. So the artifacts are also protected. So B is also for bentonite. And the US is the world's top producer, mostly from Western states. What the heck is bentonite? What's it used for? Bentonite's a form of very absorbent aluminum phyllosilicate clay. How's that? It's typically formed from weathering volcanic ash. It's primarily used for drilling mud. When you're drilling a well, oil well or whatever, and you're going through permeable rock, you put that mud down there to kind of seal the hole as you're going down. And it's used in iron foundries and construction slurries, as well as for face masks, detox, cosmetic and cleaning masks, laxatives, as well as for clarifying filters for vinegar, wines, and beer. It's also used for its absorbent qualities in auto shops for cleaning up oil and grease spills. Very humble, okay, but very useful. And crucial use as kitty litter. So Central Oregon's Bentonite Company mine in southeastern Crook County is one of the major operations, and there's another one, Teague Bentonite in Malheur County. So Central Oregon Bentonite's headquartered in Prineville, with its mines mostly in southeastern Crook County. And both of these companies' products are used mainly for drilling mud and for kitty litter. So we're going down the alphabet a little further, jump a couple of letters. The D, which is for diatomaceous earth. What is it? It's sediment made from tiny one-celled algae called diatoms. You have a lot of diatomaceous earth and this kind of sediment here in the Klamath Basin, as many of you know. Why do you call it chalk rock, right? It was first discovered in Germany, where peasants thought it was limestone and thus would be good for fertilizer. But chemists in Germany soon found that its most impactful human use, the one chemist of most note for that was Alfred Nobel, who established the Peace Prize because he used it in making his invention, dynamite. So various industries went on to use DE, as it's called, diatomaceous earth, in high-grade filtration, abrasives, workplace absorbents, again, just like bentonite, and so forth. It must be formed from fresh water, not saltwater diatoms. And the world's major sources of freshwater DE are in the US, especially down in Southern California near San Luis Obispo and Lompoc. My uncle Cy worked in a DE mine down there, huge deposit. But as many of you know, it has been mined a little bit here in Klamath County commercially at a limited scale. But it is also mined mostly in Lake County and elsewhere in the high desert. So as with bentonite, some people believe in DE's body purifying processes properties, and it will usually, and some people actually eat it as a food supplement. And yes, it too is used for kitty litter. There's that pesky cat again. It's also used in filters, paint, and Oregon is the nation's third largest producer of DE. Mined in Christmas Lake Valley and over in the Harper Valley in Malheur County. Piece for pumice. That's Mount St. Helens explosion, 1980. Bend, Oregon, very familiar with pumice. It's basically a very distinctive, concentrated form of volcanic ash, quite porous. And there's so much of it up there around Bend, in part because of the explosion 7,700 years ago that you're all familiar with, Mount Mazama, creating Crater Lake. And in Bend, pumice mining's been important since the 1950s. It's lightweight. It's used in porous vesicular properties, make it very lightweight. And it's used in ready-made concrete cinder blocks. The Romans invented concrete, and they used pumice to make the concrete roof of the big temple, the Pantheon in Rome. And the Romans invented the dome, as you probably know, in the arch. It's used in abrasives, lava soap. I got it in our washroom. Some toothpaste, you don't want to use too much of it. You wear your enamel away. Even in the stone washing of blue denim Levi's. Historically, Oregon is the nation's #1 producer of pumice. Much of it from right around Bend. You have their Central Oregon Pumice Company's mine, which was one of the largest in the country, having started in 1947. And then there's a Tumalo pit north of Bend. And has a number of employees, and it grosses almost $2 million a year. Began in 1985. Pumice is often used for growing the growing substrate for greenhouse raised plants, and in water filtration systems, in swimming pools, and in aquariums, and not kitty litter, even for dust baths for pet chinchillas. I kid you not. Okay, P, there's a chinchilla rolling around in pumice. Okay, P is also for, I guess, perlite. You read the title of this talk. Perlite, much of it coming from Lake County, near Paisley. Perlite's an amorphous form of volcanic glass, closely related to pumice. And like pumice, it's virtually all made of silica, another element. It's from ancient, heavily affected by water, hydrated obsidian flows, highly altered by water. And the US is one of the world's highest producers of perlite. This is the Tucker Hill mine in Malheur County. So what's perlite used for? As an alternative to DE, diatomaceous earth. It's used in filters, as an ingredient in metallurgical fluxes, and in industrial ceramic production. And as another whitish mineral, it has many other uses as well. It's a low-cost material that, among other things, is used in lightweight concrete blocks and tiles, and in insulation, and in Miracle-Gro potting soil. It's those little pieces of white stuff that you find in Miracle-Gro bags of potting soil, coming right from the Oregon High Desert. And yes, among its countless qualities, that it is so useful for, because of its absorbency, is used in kitty litter. So now coming to the end of the alphabet, letter Z. Remember the title? Zeolite. Z is for zeolite. Another weird one. Another one of those wonderful whitish substances in many uses. It's a microporous aluminosilicate mineral, typically formed where volcanic ash is deposited or saturated by highly alkaline, very, very salty water. It's used for filtration, metallurgical purposes. The nuclear industry uses zeolite because it absorbs radioactivity. They fuse zeolite with nuclear wastes into ceramic tiles for relatively safe long-term storage of radioactive materials. It's used for aggregate and synthetic decorative stone as a component in cement, in poultry feed, laundry detergents, in potting soils, such as detox laxatives. Oregon is America's third top producer. Victor Industries in Oregon, in the Harney Lake area, and over in Malheur County is Teague Mineral Products with its Sucker Creek Pit and Chrisman Hill mine deposits. And yes, it goes without saying that zeolite is also, this is kidding. Okay, but we're not yet quite finished with the alphabet. The high desert country of southeastern Oregon does have a few gemstone mines, actual commercial enterprises. O is for opal. Which is a beautiful hydrated form of silica. The most famous opal mines are in the Australian outback, where it's so hot, the opal miners dig their homes underground. They live underground. And while they're digging out their house, they're mining opal at the same time. But there's a number of much smaller opal mining enterprises scattered in the far west, including in the Oregon high desert. And these are both, some of them are commercial operations that extract high quality opal for sale to retail outfits or rock hounding stores and so forth, and jewelry makers. But they also allow fee mining, where you pay. You can drive to the mine and pay some bucks and go scratch around with a shovel, pick and so forth, and get to keep what you find. O is also for Oregon sunstone, also known as plush diamonds. In recent years, sunstones have become a novelty, a real hit with jewelry makers. I gave my partner, Vicky, back there a pair of sunstone earrings. They're pink. This I got at a BLM site where you can do it for free, and it's not pink, but it's kind of a nice yellow color, sandstone. And what are they? They're a beautiful form of feldspar that comes in many colors. And the sunstones are mined at the Dust Devil Mine in Lake County, also by King Enterprises and by the Oregon Sunstone Company. Both private land and nearby BLM rock hounding areas where you can mine at no cost. See the colors over there? So now on to the high desert rock that started out this presentation. Okay. Obsidian. Used in jewelry today, various kinds, including those big honking earplugs that some younger people wear in their earlobes. And you know, you're getting pierced, you're getting tattoos, you got to have the earplugs. I've got a little piece of shimmer obsidian on this necklace that Vicky gave me from Oaxaca, Mexico. It's a very unusual kind. People that know how to nap obsidian, knock on it and create identifiable objects out of, they're making dozens of arrowheads for sale to people to put around their necks. And I imagine the Northern Paiute would look on that and just kind of scratch their head. But we've come full circle with obsidian from the 14,000 years ago or so, now actually being used by this group of people, kind of a subculture of Aboriginal skills people that make their own bows and arrows, Indian way, if you will, and atlatls, the dart thrower with obsidian tipped darts and arrows. I believe some are actually out hunting that way. And obsidian blades have been, and I think probably still are being used by surgeons for surgery, because a blade, which is not chipped on the edges, it's just sheer breakage, is so sharp, it's sharper than a stainless steel surgical blade. So different uses for obsidian. So with that, we have come full circle. But before I end this presentation, let's take a final look into the possible future of mining in the high desert. So L is for what? You got it, by golly, you guys are on top of it. Lithium batteries. Over in Malheur County, southernmost Malheur County, and in Harney County over near the Alvord Desert as well, there are lithium deposits. And there is a looming project in southernmost Malheur County in what's called the McDermott Caldera. Huge volcanic caldera, much larger than the Crater Lake caldera. Much older also. So it's not that recognizable. And it straddles the Oregon-Nevada border. So both the Jindalee lithium mining project and the Aurora lithium mining project are in Oregon, Malheur County. And there's another big one not too far to the south at Thacker Patch in Nevada. These are coming online, it looks like, or at least they have been. This shows part of the area that would be affected by the Jindalee operation. Open pit mining, almost certainly. And there's been extensive test drilling has been done, and sampling excavations have occurred. And there is, as we know, a global lithium rush going on right now with the ready market. That shows your lithium batteries down beneath where you're sitting and driving. So, as would be expected out there in Malheur County, some residents are not happy with these proposals. Others see jobs and dollars in the offing. Elsewhere in the world, new lithium mines have been open pit mines, like the upper one in Australia and the lower one in Africa. And the process requires huge amounts of water and land for the leaching ponds to recover the lithium. So on that sober note, I'd like to thank you for your time and attention. And if there are any questions, I know we're a little later than I promised, but if anybody's got any questions or comments or anything, just go ahead, raise your hand, and we'll have at it. Yes, ma'am. Hematite? Hematite is an iron ore, basically. It's a form of iron ore. It's not volcanic, and you know you can get hematite rings. Yeah, and it's not related to obsidian at all. Okay, all right, yeah. Anybody else? Hopefully, yes, sir. That I don't know. I think it, maybe they use some of those white materials that are nearby. I don't know. They're so useful, so many things, but I don't know the process yet. So, but that could be a very big thing out there. It could take up a lot of sage grouse habitat. Oh, anybody else? Okay, thank you. Thank you.